is a story from long, long ago, and it's called The Peddler of Shuffleham. Now there was a peddler, his name was John Chapman, and he walked the byways and the streets and the roads of England, and he carried a pack on his back, and he took things to sell, you know, things people would like needles and scissors and, and sheets, because they didn't have newspapers, so that's how they got the news. Well, it was a lot of work, all that walking, but he would come back to the village of Shuffleham, and he would go into his cottage. Now, truth to tell, it needed some work, that cottage. Birds would fly among the rafters because the windows were not all tight, and water sometimes seeped in because there were holes in the roof. Well, he had his dog with him, and he would go up and he went to bed, and this particular night, he was sound asleep, wrapped in a blanket. The dog was allowed if it was down at the foot of the bed. And they were sleeping, and all of a sudden, there was this voice. Oh, it was a lovely voice. It said, "Go to London Bridge." And the peddler, he sat straight up, John Chapman, and he looked around, and there was nobody there. His dog was quietly snoring. He looked out the window. There was nobody there. He said, it was a dream. And he wrapped himself back in a blanket, and he went back to sleep. The next night, same thing. A voice clear as clear said, "Go to London Bridge. Go to London Bridge." And this time, John Chapman, he got up and he walked around his house, and there was nothing. And he said, "It's a dream." And he wrapped himself in his blanket and he went back to sleep. Third night, sure enough, that same voice, so pure and clear, "Go to London Bridge. Go to London Bridge." And John Chapman, he said, "You know, dreams are odd things. Sometimes you should pay attention to them." And he got up and he took bread and cheese and put it in his knapsack, and he called his dog, and they went. And he walked and walked and walked and walked. Never been to London before. And he walked and walked, and he got there, and he had to ask people directions to get to London Bridge. Well, it was a sight. I mean, there were people going up and down in carriages and wagons, and he'd never seen so much activity. And he thought, well, I'm here. What do I do? Well, in those days, the bridges came up high in the middle, and they had houses and shops right built on the bridge. So he went by all of these, peering with interest, and he got to the head of the bridge, and he stood there. And he stood there. And he stood there. And nothing happened. Well, he watched the people. He said, nothing was happening. No voices, no messages. Night came, it was cold. He and the dog went down next to the embankment and somehow got through the night, huddled together, and he's thinking to himself, some dreams you need to pay attention to, and maybe some you don't. Next morning, shook himself, he went up to that same place one last time, and he was standing there, and just at that moment, one of the shopkeepers who had his place on the bridge came out, drew up the awnings, getting ready for the day, and he looked over there at John Chapman, and he said, "Stranger, what are you doing here? I saw you standing there all day yesterday. Well, what are you about?" And John Chapman, glad to have someone to talk to. He said, well, you know, I had this dream. It said, come to, and the shopkeeper hit his thigh, and he started to laugh. He said, I had a dream, a ridiculous dream. I had a dream the other night, said to go to Shuffleton, someplace named Shuffleton, and that I was to dig under an apple tree and I would find gold. Well, and the shopkeeper was an expansive type, and he turned to his right thinking that the shopkeeper next to him would be interested in this story. He turned back and the stranger was gone. He'd been there just a moment ago, and the shopkeeper looked down, and there he was, running towards the end of the bridge, and the dog with him with his tongue hanging out. And they didn't stop till they got to Shuffleton. And John Chapman, he went out in that yard of his, and he grabbed a spade, and he put it down in the ground. And sure enough, he heard a sound, and he took it again. And there was down there a clay pot that he had broken with the spade, and gold was falling out onto the ground. And John Chapman's days of peddling were over. And he fixed the roof, and he fixed the windows, and he and the dog, they ate whatever they wanted to. And after that, there was plenty of gold left. He gave it to the people in the village who were hungry or needed it. And he lived to be a very old man. And when he died, the village, well, they put up a statue to him in the center of the square. There was John Chapman, and there was his dog. And there was a sign on the bottom. It said, some dreams will turn to gold. This is going to sound like we synchronized more than we actually did. The next story is a jack-tale. Storytellers are very interested in the tradition of the jack-tales. They are known to come from Appalachia. And there's one strand of jack-tales that concern Jack and his two brothers. Now, the jack-tales have happy endings if you're Jack. There was an old man. He had 3 sons. There was Will, Tom, and Jack. This day, he decided he'd call them to him, the 3 boys, and he said, time for me to give you each your portion. You go out into the world. You see who marries richest. Well, Will and Tom, they got their suits on, got themselves ready, but they didn't want to go with Jack. He looked like such a slab. Up the holler, that's what you say when you mean really bad. Well, so they went off. Will and Tom, they went off. And Jack, he said to his father, there's one thing you've got that I want. And that's your old pet fox. So the old man said, take the fox. Jack, he put that fox under his arm and he went off. And he walked, and he walked, and he walked. He went further than he'd ever been. Come night, he saw a house up there. He said, I better find myself a place to spend the night. Didn't have a nickel in his pocket. Nothing but that old fox. He went up there. He ho-ho! No answer. He went and pounded on the door. The door opened and there was a little cat. Pretty little cat. Jack varmints here. And the cat said, cat and mouse. She said, I was a pretty woman, but the witches, they witched me. You stay here 3 nights. You don't let any varmints in here. I'll be a pretty woman again and I'll marry you. Jack, he's looking. Looks down to the fox. What is it? And the fox, he looks at that cat and he looks up at Jack and he says, gold enough. And Jack, he says, by God, I'll do it. And he went over there, he got himself some tree branches down, he made some weapons, and he stood at that door all that night. All that night, those varmints were coming. There come a bear, there come a bull, there comes an elephant, and he is fighting, and he is fighting, and he is fighting. In the morning, sun breaks, and he's done it. No varmint got in that house, and he turned around, he came back in there, and there on the bed was a little baby. He went and fixed himself some breakfast. I mean, the varmints, they didn't come during the day. It was during the night. Second night, same thing. They're coming, they're coming. There is a pit bull coming. There are snakes trying to get around the edge of the door. And he's fighting, and he's fighting, and he's fighting. And the morning comes, blessed be. He is really tired. He turns back into the room, and there in the bed is a little girl. Well, got through that day last night. Last night, there is a boar coming at him with a thing coming out of his... And Jackie is fighting, he is fighting, he is fighting, and the morning comes and he has done it. He has kept them out, and he turns around and there is a pretty girl, and they was married, and she gave Jack such a suit of clothes as he had never had. And more than that, she took him out to the barn, and there was a carriage with 2 white horses, and they got in it, and they went back towards Jack's father's house, and they came near. Jack heard a guitar playing, and he heard people laughing, and there was a party going on in Jack. He took that carriage into a roundabout. He left it there with his wife, and he got on his old clothes, like when he left home, and he walked into his daddy's house. And there was Will with his wife, and he pushed her behind them. And there was Tom over there with his wife, and he put her behind the door because they didn't want the wives to see Jack. Jack, he looks around, and he goes out of there, and he goes back to that carriage, and he puts on his fine new suit of clothes. And he took his wife on his arm, and they walked into that house, and he saw his daddy smiling. And Will, he grabbed his wife and went out the back door. And Tom, he grabbed his wife, and they had to shimmy past out the front door because Jack, he married the richest.